Well, thanks for coming out. There's 5 more people here than I expected. It was noon hour, and I thought, we'll do pretty good considering. But my name is Kath Smythe. I'm the horticulturist with the Horticultural Society, and it's kind of started about 2 years ago when we went into COVID, and I wanted to have tea parties with everybody. And that was really fun. And then we switched it to Zoom, and it was very popular. So here we are. And I also do a hands-on one called coaching, and we dig and we make holes. I'm not allowed to make as many here as I was in the old place because the park's on that side. So I have to stick in here a bit. Today my guests are Elaine Rood. And Elaine is, without a doubt, a fountain of information. She truly is. And she gardens on a very large garden. And her biggest problem is the deer or the moose.
No, the porcupines now.
Oh, she's got porcupines.
We have a fence. So the deer and moose can't get in anymore.
She has this big fence. But you had a deer last year that you didn't know how it was getting in.
Oh, I found out.
Anyway, so Elaine knows, and she's a market gardener, or was a market gardener. She grows cut flowers and vegetables and has an amazing assortment of perennials and trees and shrubs. And we are also joined by Elise Watson, more fondly known as the Bee Lady. And Elise, I met you, I can't even remember how many years ago at the zoo, and you were just introducing bees to everybody.
Yeah, it's been 14 years.
Yes.
That I've been doing this.
And I always thought, wow, what a neat thing finally to be doing and introducing them. And you've moved your business itself out of the city, out to Carstairs, because if you have a beehive in the city, you have to have a license?
No, so that's not why.
No?
No, I'm a commercial bee breeder and producer.
Okay.
And commercial honey production.
Okay.
So my operation's based out of Crossfield, Alberta, but we actually just moved into the city. So now I have an urban yard that I'm attempting to garden. I'm going to lean on you two for your expertise to figure out what works great. But my business, ABC Bees, has been doing bee education and training in Western Canada and now throughout North America for going on 14 years. So we specialize in educating people about the importance of pollinators, specifically honeybees, and how we can do more to create conservation acts, management, and care for people who want to weird out and get into bugs. Pretty much.
And I'm kind of used to bug people because I had the wonderful experience of working with Ruth Stahl, whose name probably doesn't mean much, but she wrote a book on bugs, but yes. Working with her was quite an experience. And one of the first times I went upstairs and had lunch with her at the garden center, I'm sitting there and looking at her, and her hair is moving. And I'm looking at her, and I said, Ruth, there's something in your hair. Oh, she says, oh, that's my tomato hornworm. She picks it out and puts it on her shoulder. It'll take him a while, she says, to get back to the... She was fascinating. You would go to the bookstore to see her, to show her your problems, etc. And she had a population going on. Like quite often the bookstore had things on the bookshelves and jars with things in it, and it was fascinating. So I enjoy all insects myself now. I managed to get around not wanting to pick up a bug because of Ruth. The only thing I never got over were the people that brought me, well, one guy when Ruth was on holidays brought me a coffee can, and I was talking to my customer and finishing my conversation, and I opened the lid of the coffee can, and without looking down, I stuck my hand in, and it was garter snakes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you would say cool.
We used to raise them when I was kids.
Totally, my kids do.
They're not only, they don't bite you or anything, but they're constrictors. So they wrap themselves around my hand, and they also ooze a scent.
A nasty scent, yeah.
A really nasty scent. So without even thinking twice, I went, threw it all over my head.
Poor snake.
And the snakes went into the store because I had a window back there. And they went into the store, and the stock boys cursed me for about a week while they picked snakes out of the pots. However, I digress. Lisa's brought some really interesting specimens of bees and some interesting things. So what are we going to kick off first?
Well, it's Pollinator Week.
Yeah.
So we are so excited to be celebrating Pollinator Week in the city of Calgary. There's new animal bylaws that includes allowing an actual licensing program to keep bees in the city of Calgary, which is always so exciting. So in these passion for pollinators that I have brought a diversity of pollinators that are not honeybees. Because when it comes to pollinators, especially in a city environment, it's important that we take the time to look at the bug that you are bothered by. Because a lot of times people will be like, it's yellow, it's black, it's fine, it's a wasp or a bee. Or they'll say it's a small fly, therefore, I should kill it, no see 'em, things like that. We actually have over, I think about 150 different species of native bee found in the Calgary area. And we also are fortunate to have 12 different species of bumblebee that are endemic to the Calgary area, which is the most bumblebee diversity in a single region than anywhere else in the world. There's actually only 300 species of bumblebees in the world. Almost all of them are found in the Northern Hemisphere. So we're very fortunate to have a lot of diversity because we sit right on the foothills. So we have a high alpine species as well as some more prairie grasslands and desert species that can be found in the city of Calgary. So when we think about bumblebees, especially because this winter was actually very good for native bee survivability, you're going to be finding bumblebees nesting. And a lot of times I get calls and people complaining. They're like, I have bumblebees in my basement and what do I do? Where are they nesting? A lot of times the queen bumblebees, when they come out of winter, so I'll show you guys a little bumblebee life cycle here. When they come out of winter, what ends up happening here is you have them come out, and she's a single mom. So what she's going to do is she's going to forage for nectar and pollen to satiate her hunger and give her the energy she needs to initiate a new nest. So a lot of times in the spring when you're finding bumblebees in your basement, finding bumblebees in your garage, it's not because you have a nest that's initiated. These are these emergent queens looking in cubbies and holes and cracks and sneaking into a space in search of a nesting site and getting lost. So if you find a bumblebee in your basement, it's because you have some sort of cavity, whether it's a mouse hole, whether it's a dryer vent, that they're able to get in. Catch them, you can give them some sugar water, don't give them honey, give them some sugar water, and you can release them, and that'll allow them to then maybe initiate a nest somewhere else, which is great. Now, once they initiate that nest, a large bumblebee nest will max out here in Calgary at about 300 individuals. But a nest with 300 individuals is only this big. So this nest will, you can see I have a little queen here that I've pinned. She will lay eggs. They actually have twins and triplets and quadruplets in the single cell, and then they'll pupate separately. She'll feed them. They'll have a little bit of pollen stored, a little bit of nectar stored, but really that's just for rainy days when they can't leave the nest. And then the rest of the workers will forage. So the average nest size that I've captured or recovered in a bumblebee rescue program that I used to run was about 50 to 60 individuals. Now, some species are more territorial than the others. And as we were talking earlier, the smaller the insect, the more bothersome it can be. That's the same with wasps, it's the same with scorpions, same with bumblebees. So sometimes you'll have a smaller species, usually it's got an orange belt on it. You might find that they're a little bit more particular about you being near the nest than the larger Nevada bumblebee, Bombus nevadensis, which is just yellow and black. And they are like the classic Winnie the Pooh bumblebee. You'll watch them, they don't seem to carry you around. So not all bumblebee nests are nuisance bumblebee nests. And depending on where they choose to nest, they may not be a nuisance at all. So they prefer old mouse houses, they prefer bird houses, and honestly, this is as big as it gets. And in the fall, the queen dies, there's no replacement in this nest, all the workers die, daughter queens or princesses will mate and then find a burrow over winter underground. Usually compost piles are great places, and then they'll initiate a nest the next year. So you don't have to worry about a bumblebee nest actually damaging your infrastructure, housing, walls, or anything like that. If they've moved in, this is as big as it's going to get.
So we don't have to worry about them moving back into the same place every year.
Well, that's a funny thing. Where there's been a nest in place, it does give off a pheromone or aroma, right?
Okay.
Because it does smell like other bees.
That's right.
So a lot of times I'll have people be like, I had a nest there, I don't want a nest there next year. I'm like, great, once you have the first snowfly, seal that hole, caulk it shut. Then they won't come back.
What's a snowfly?
Like
when
the
the
snow
snow flies.
actually flies.
Not the insect.
Sorry, I'm talking
I have
insects.
this thing for bugs. I mean, it's all got to be a bug,
So,
right?
so once it snows, you'll see a lot less activity because
Yes.
they don't usually winter, or the daughter queens don't hibernate in the nesting locations.
Oh, okay.
They'll go and nest in the ground where the ground freezes. They'll freeze. They have antifreeze kind of product in them, and then they remain dormant, like frogs, salamanders, bumblebees,
Okay.
and queen wasps do the same.
Oh, yes.
And they reinitiate a nest every spring.
Oh, very cool.
So they're unique in native bees that they actually overwinter as adults, where solitary bees, like whether they're leaf cutters, this is kind of what the paper leaf nests look like. You might be familiar with the bird houses that are like pollinator habitat similar to these kind of tubes. These are for solitary bees. They're stingless bees. There are more diversity in solitary bees than there is in bumblebees in the world, and honeybees too. So these are like these little kind of blocks, and they'll overwinter either as a pupa,
Yes.
ready to hatch, or an egg on top of a stored pollen. So it's kind of like seed saving.
I have
What's going
two
on
of
there?
them at my house. One in the backyard and one at the front. I've never been tormented or chased by any of these bees. I think they're just fascinating. And I like the solitary bees because, there's something to be said about wanting to spend time alone in the garden. So,
Well, and the wonderful thing about solitary bees I love is their diversity of color, of presentation. So you can have these blue orchard mason bees that are this iridescent, bright neon blue, gorgeous. And then there's the Cletidae that they have these like white masks on their faces and white abdomens. And they also store pollen in different ways. Some have them under their abdomen. You'll see the leafcutter bees will have this neon color under their abdomen. Some of them will have them on their front medium legs, under their armpits. But they like to nest in like the wooden shakes like you have along there. You can see the little cavities all along.
yeah.
You'll have leafcutter bees in there. If you have brickworks, they like to go in between the chinks in the brick. And if you have like a sandbox or even like a drier area, you'll see them move in. They're stingless and they just kind of create a cavity. Some of them will actually use something like this, like the lamb's ear that has these like little fibers on it. They're called carder bees. They have these hairs on their front arms. They'll actually card the hairs off and like knit little tiny nests. There's plaster bees, there's they use soil, mason bees use soil, there's leaf cutters. And if you have roses and you see little round perfect circles out of your roses, the leaves, do not be spraying that for a pest. It's not a caterpillar, it's a leaf cutter bee. It's a perfect material for them to build these beautiful little tube structures to raise their babies. The last one I want to mention
okay.
of the solitary bees is these tiny little bees, and they're called perdita, and they're known as fairy bees. So they're as small as
need
little.
one of those.
I know, they're so cute. They're as small as fruit flies, some of them.
Ooh.
So it's really important that being alone in your garden,
Yes.
that you take your time to take a breath and observe, because you might find that what you're looking at isn't actually a pest at all.
Very cool. Very cool. So does anyone have any questions for Lise?
Honeybees in particular do. Yeah.
Dance. What do you mean?
Oh, so they
do the bee dance.
Yeah, they do some like different physical movement within the hive to communicate this origin of pollen and nectar. Other things like maybe where water is located if they need water, as well as they do the dances to communicate potential nesting sites if the colony is going to divide and send off a swarm.
Ooh, very cool.
But the thing, inside a cavity of a colony, it's completely devoid of light. So their
Yeah.
primary communication is vibration and pheromone. So that's their primary strategy of communication. So the bee dance is pretty neat. Wasps and hornets tend to be, we always associate them with paper nests, but there are actually lots of different species of wasps that are actually ground nesting and solitary. So you can find wasps that don't produce a social population. They'll go in, they'll forage for pollen, which is a great protein source. They'll forage off of like fallen fruit, nectar off of plants. And then they're omnivores, so they can be carnivorous or scavenge. And then what they'll end up doing is they'll take it back, feed egg or larva. I've actually had a solitary nest with a plexiglass side, and I was watching a solitary wasp, and it kept bringing in spiders and caterpillars, and they would be stunned, tucked in, and then sealed it, laid an egg on it and sealed it. And so it was a solitary wasp. They're excellent at keeping pests at bay, especially when it comes to aphids and caterpillars and things like that. But that you wouldn't even notice them, and they wouldn't attack you or be territorial over the nesting site. So again, stop, watch and listen, right, to see what you're looking at. Take your time, take a deep breath, and have a look. But yeah, wasps are exceptionally good at pollination too.
They're also really good. They're probably the best predatory insect in the garden. They will clean up all your aphids, any of those insects while they're nesting. It's only later in the season when they get a little nasty. Yeah.
Well, and I think the biggest complaints I ever get, because I get calls for, I have a swarm of bees, I have bumblebee nests, I need bees removed, and I love that people call, because people are calling because they aren't sure what it is, but instead of poisoning it immediately, they want to do their due diligence to make sure it's not bees. Always, when I have a lot of calls about hornets or wasp nests, the paper nests, it's usually in suburban areas where the soil isn't healthy, the tree maturity is poor, and the ecosystem is suppressed. And so the ecosystem is out of balance. So when that happens, you have a lot of pests come in, whether it's aphids, whether it's ants, whether it's, we have those tent caterpillars. Things come in because there isn't a healthy amount of predation or ecosystem. And then the following year, guess who was fed really well? That wasp nest that previous year. The colony will produce a lot of queens, and then you all of a sudden have a huge boon of wasp population. So I think if you're seeing that you have a really bad wasp issue, if you're seeing you have a really bad hornet issue, I think it's a really good question to step back instead of looking at the issue itself of like, what kind of ecosystem am I living in? Is this feel like a healthy, balanced ecosystem? And if it isn't healthy and balanced, what can be done to propagate that? And I think that's where you come in, Elaine.
Yes.
Where we can talk about plants and species.
Yeah, one of the things you have to add to it is everybody rushes to the hose or a can of Raid or something once they see pests. But there's a lag period from when the pests arrive and the populations build up to when the predators arrive. So if you go and eradicate the aphids, there's no reason for the predators to show up. So you have to kind of just stand back and let nature take its course.
Did you find that in your vegetable gardening?
Yeah, not so much in the vegetables. I have very few pests on my vegetables, but fruit trees, at this time of year, the cherries especially, all the tips are absolutely black with aphids. But if you just leave them, eventually they disappear. And there's never enough that there's, it's maybe unsightly, but they don't kill the shrub or damage it in any way. So it's, you should never actually ever go for the can of Raid. I love the commercials, but just stand back and watch, and you'd be surprised what comes in.
Aphids are gone off the tips of your branches, and they never get a chance to get into the fruit itself.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the bigger lesson here that I've learned as a beekeeper is like really thinking clearly, I guess when you're starting your seedlings or you're starting your beekeeping season, is like, what is the purpose of all of this? Why am I participating in gardening? Why am I participating in the bees? Why am I participating in nature? Is it to control everything, or is it to participate and learn and be a member of this process? And I think that's something as a human being, it can be really hard, especially when we're like constantly trying to take control of like groceries, work, family, life, to like relinquish control. But I find for me, the biggest exercise, because I am very much a person who likes to have solutions.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Is to step back and to be like, what if I waited a week? Not what if I waited all season. What if I waited a week and just observed the week? Because, a week isn't that long of a time, but it can be a lifetime when it comes to a solitary bee. It can be a lifetime when it comes to a caterpillar turning to a butterfly. And it can be a lifetime when it comes to a wasp nest that will be predaceous against those aphids to get enough workers to then take advantage of that food resource.
Yes.
So I think the biggest lesson I've learned in beekeeping, and now in my failure to successfully garden often, is to sit back, observe, take notes, and try something different next time.
So, Elaine, as a lifelong gardener, how often do you annoy your garden?
Annoy my garden?
Yeah, or get into it and go, what else can I be doing? Or do you just let it happen? Like,
I'm almost at the point where whatever it is. I'm done.
Well, you can always deadhead, right?
Nope.
If you need to poke it, you don't deadhead?
Nope.
Oh, I'm always like,
Nope, that's food for the birds.
Oh,
that's right.
Okay.
I go in at this time of year, you're cleaning up, you're pulling out some of the nastier weeds. And then after that, it's kind of on its own. And some of my nicest spots are the ones where I just stand back and let it happen.
Okay. I'll try and take my own advice now. I'll wait a week.
I find that I have spent so many years, I grew up gardening with my dad and my mom. My mom was a control freak, but my grandpa, my dad's dad, was very much about planting it and letting it be. And Grandpa, well, his way of telling if it was time to garden was to make me take my shoes and socks off and walk through the bare soil to see if it was warm enough. If I shrieked, he didn't plant for another week.
Well, that's better than the farmers who used to drop their drawers and sit on the soil.
So
were they fertilizing at the same time?
I hope not.
I hope not. So at your place that you've been gardening on for how many years?
Be 23 Halloween.
And what's your most successful part of this garden?
The whole thing, actually, because we started off with a field. And so now it has lots of trees and shrubs, and they're all established and they look after themselves. We don't have enough water or enough time or energy to go out and baby them all. So it's kind of established itself, and
it's part of the building and building your ecosystem.
Yeah, like we have habitat for everything. So I don't do little, bug houses or any of that because we have lots of stuff.
Yeah.
I used to, the first bug house I ever saw was at a hotel in Germany, and I was absolutely fascinated with it. So as a result, I live in a city lot, a small one. I came home and had to have one. So I piled up some logs and then after I did that, I thought, I bet you there's more bugs living in my pile of firewood than there is in this whole little thing I just built. But I took such great delight in it that I had to continue it. And honestly, in a small city lot, I grow a small vegetable garden to sustain myself. I have perennials because I'm kind of crazy about them.
Yes.
And I've over the years planted 5 trees on that lot, and of the 5 trees, there's 3 left.
Yeah.
And it's because I kind of lost control of a couple of things. So it's how much you can control and how much you can't. And for me, it's an exercise in learning how to educate myself further to do what I do best, which is I like to garden, and I'm a solitary gardener.
She says on camera at the Horticultural Society.
No, it isn't that. It's just that I hide. I go out on my front driveway, and the entire neighborhood arrives.
Oh.
And so as a result, I stay in the back garden during the afternoon and evening, and during the daytime or the early hours, I garden out back. And then I'll go out front and garden very quickly for a little while. So I find that part and parcel of my gardening education. But I've learned more now about what bees I'm going to look for and critters. So I'm going to try and do a little more of that. Today, we discovered there's an anthill in the grass.
Yes.
So we're all sitting here coexisting with it because we stirred it up. And we're doing okay. And I was saying to, was it Elise, that one of my favorite plants to plant is hyssop. It's a herb. Makes great tea, by the way. It has a licorice flavored scent, but it keeps the ants at bay. They don't want to build their nest around it. They don't want to be near it, and it's probably one of my favorites. But the trick is to get a really well-established root system, and that's what keeps them at bay. But I enjoy the fact that I can play around with my herbs and find different purposes for them.
And they're great pollinator plants.
They're great pollinator plants, but now I have a question, because I got a new house that came with peonies. I'm so excited. Would you avoid planting hyssop near the peonies?
Yes.
Yeah, because you need the ants.
Well, you want the ants to eat the blooms, so you don't put them within about 5 feet of them, because otherwise the ants won't come and do their job and come around and crawl on you.
And you disagree?
She disagrees.
Yeah.
I love this.
Yeah.
Okay,
this
let's
is a gardening
get into it.
expertise.
The ants are coming for the little extra bits of nectar that the flowers. They do. It's been shown they do nothing to help open the flowers or
Oh, really?
So they're just like, if you look at your buds, they're covered, but they're after that extra floral nectar that the peony is producing.
So the peony doesn't need it removed in order to blossom.
It brings it in for pollinators and stuff, and the ants take advantage.
So the ants, of course, are proven yet again to be opportunists and not to have co-evolved with anything.
Yeah,
that's right. And I find that ants, well, watch them. They have come from the grass and they're evacuating over here to all these plants and this fresh new soil, and they're opportunists on that level. And I personally plant herbs from the standpoint of, I really like the smell of the leaves.
Yeah.
And I'll walk through the garden and rub my fingers on them and go, oh, this is so interesting.
The pineapple sage is the nicest.
My favorite, did I put one in?
This is pineapple sage.
This one?
And this is the mint.
This is the one that took me, in the garden center, I used to always ask to unload the herbs. And this one is pineapple sage, and you have to smell it. But you know that song, Pina Coladas? Do you like drinking pina? It reminds me of pina coladas.
It makes fabulous teas.
Yes.
Does it taste pineapple-y in tea?
Oh, yeah. Really, really good.
It has a fabulous...
There's more of it this year. Last year there was almost none.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's good.
So that to me is part of why I go into my garden. And really and truly, it's very valuable from that standpoint. The other one, I'm sorry, but I couldn't find one with a good pot this week.
That's all right.
Well, it's been around in the garden center for a while. But
that's the variegated one.
Yeah, this is the lemon.
Ooh, I like that one.
The lemon thyme.
Ooh, yeah, anything lemony flavored.
Anything lemony flavored, and it makes amazing tea. So I do really, really enjoy it.
Ooh, I can smell the lemon one already.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and you can really get to it. Now,
so nice.
As I say, I played around this week because...
Oh, that's beautiful.
And I made a tea garden.
Yeah.
And to me, that's part of playing and creating things for yourself. I have chamomile, and chamomile, you have to be careful because there's scentless chamomile. So one of the tests that you do at the garden center is to smell it to make sure it's not the scentless.
And then throw it away.
And if you do find it, you question them why they have it. But all of these are tea herbs. And I really and truly think that they're just wonderful. Lemon balm, another lemon flavored one. So when I'm planting to do these kinds of things, I put them on my deck so that I can smell them. And I do enjoy the smell. And this year, I discovered ginger mint.
Oh, yes.
Ooh.
Be very careful with ginger mint.
Yes, it can be a little bit invasive.
It's not supposed to be hardy, but yes, it is.
Yes, it is, and it will cover your... the mint family altogether. Well, yeah, the Mojito Mint. The Mojito Mint is, very popular because of the drinks that you can make with it. But don't plant it in your garden to go invasive on you because it's like all the mints. And if you want to identify a mint, it has a square stem. So when you're playing around with these things, think that way. So always remember that with plants and with insects, they all have a companion of some sort. And probably the largest group are any of the bees or wasps or any of that. Although watching the ants progress over to all these plants, I'm realizing how many of them are coming to.
Marjoram is part of the mint family. It has square stems.
Yes.
But
it's very aggressive in its container too. It's like taken over.
Yes. Marjoram is very.
It's very
pushy.
similar to oregano, so it should smell more oregano-y than minty.
Yeah. I just keep thinking it's mint. Someone would switch tags on me.
No, marjoram can be, it's just like oregano, as you were saying. My oregano patch, and every year, silly me, I'll buy another oregano plant. And then I plant it in the garden in the fall, and I now have a clump of oregano this big. Why am I going to the store and spending $5 or $6 on another oregano plant to put in one of these?
Because you can put oregano in everything you make every day of your life.
You use a lot of it.
You can always, I mean, it's good in everything.
And that brings me to the point about we use our gardens as ornamentation, but we should also be thinking about the food source of the garden and what you can continue to do. Like, I look at, the herbs as valuable from that standpoint, and I will dry my herbs, I will keep them, but it just seems like I have an overabundance of oregano.
Well, and it's a great pollinator plant.
Yes.
You let it flower, you'll see, and it flowers right at the niche time, which is, we call them dearth, is a period of time when nature isn't supplying a lot of food resource. So even right now is kind of a dearth window before we get this second succession of plants, and you'll see sweet clover take off, you'll see sandfoin take off in the fields. And if you look at your garden, you kind of see it's this sweet spot where if it's not the annuals you're planting, it's these perennials that are just starting to bud out and ready to pop. So the nice thing about herbs is when they do bolt, they do it in the second dearth period, which is between, sunflowers and ornamental thistles and other plants that come in the fall. You kind of have this window of time where food resources are low, but nests of bumblebees and solitary bees are quite large. So they're looking for food. So the herbs allowing them to flower, you'll see them covered in bumblebees and solitary bees.
And the hyssop, I didn't put it in the tea garden because I'm going to put it out in my garden, and it's hardy here, and it's really valuable.
I wasn't able to smell it.
Weren't you?
No.
Oh, sometimes
it's very faint.
Yeah, it has a very faint. But here again, it's the taste of it that makes the difference. And again, it has a square stem.
Oh, it does too, hey?
It's definitely part of the mint. Some of our best hardy plants have a mint base to them or a mint family base to them, so it makes them.
Is that salvia?
Yep.
What is salvia?
Salvia.
One of the things you can do with any of the herbs that have a lemon scent to them is it's an excellent natural mosquito repellent.
Yes.
And when it warms up, I suspect we're going to have lots of mosquitoes. You just take it and rub it over your skin, and the mosquitoes disappear.
Another reason to have lemon balm and things on your back deck where you're sitting.
That's right.
You have them around marigolds as well.
Yeah, and I plant and I put quite a bit of I've got lemon verbena in here, lemon balm, and it's just because sometimes that's what I want on my deck. And I have to confess, I redesigned my back deck so that it had a herb shelf running along it, because I figured I like them near me. Mind you, the problem I have is in the fall going out and trying to find homes for them in my. That's why my neighbor.
Transplanting them.
Yes. Now my neighbor, who we share the planting between the driveways, it's starting to fill out. In fact, I asked Glenn yesterday, do you think I could get away with planting squash in his bed? Do you think he'll notice?
Yeah. You'll find too that if you have your herbs closer to the kitchen, you are more likely to use them than if you have to sprint to the far end of the garden. It's like,
that's right.
Or you forget you have them.
Yes,
because we have 8 months of winter of habit of going into your cupboard.
Yeah.
So you have to break in 3 months.
Yeah, and I always think maybe I should put a flag in the oregano so that I don't keep buying it.
Yeah. One of the things, if there's tons and tons of different varieties of mints, and you have to be careful if you're going to grow them to separate them, because if you keep them all together, they all taste the same.
Oh, that's nice.
So, and they like shade. So if you have a shady spot, you can put pots of mint and they'll be happy.
They'll be really happy.
Yeah.
Is that what you do with it?
Yeah, I have it all in pots and I've got them all over the place.
Oh,
we
really?
make iced tea all summer, and I just go and grab handfuls and throw it in, and
Yeah,
That
that
sounds-
flavored water with a piece of citrus in there.
yeah.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
so good.
Very nice.
It's very refreshing, and it's not loaded with sugar.
Yeah, believe it or not, because of the photosynthetic process of a plant, they produce natural sugars. So it is a sweetener on a natural basis. Hence the stevia
Yeah.
has such a sweet taste to it, but I find stevia a little too sweet. I can maybe put a pinch of the leaf in a tea or
Which
in
is
something.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 100 times sweeter than sugar.
Yeah.
Or you could just keep honeybees
I do dry them.
and just
Yeah.
put your own scoop of honey into your tea too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it works really well. Like I dry everything either in brown paper bags, or this past year I took up cardboard box gardening drying because I didn't have enough paper bags. And so I put them into these cardboard. It worked like really
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Same thing, same stuff, and I got lots off of it. And my family really, they complain that I give them herbs in jars for Christmas. But they also say to me in the spring, "Are you going to give me that herb thing again?" So, you know,
You just have to be careful. Not all herbs dry.
yes.
So some of them are better frozen. So basil and parsley,
yes.
They brown.
they do
right?
not dry well at all. They
No.
lose all their flavor.
Yes.
Chervil,
Just doing freezer. That's
Yes.
yeah. But you can like stir it up with some water or a little bit of oil. That works well too. Chervil doesn't like to be dried.
True.
Tarragon doesn't like to be dried.
No, my tarragon has to be put in a freezer bag and
Yeah.
frozen.
And
Light
it's-
bulbs are going off in my head because I have many rotted trays of these things.
Yeah. And you can buy them, dried, but when you go in there, it's like, yeah, it doesn't taste like anything.
It just tastes like it's
Yeah.
it's been in a shelf somewhere in cardboard.
That's right. And I often think that some of the herbs that we buy in the grocery stores, in the big jars or packaging, I don't think they dried them. And that doesn't really work.
Yeah.
As
So
flavor.
the freezer part, I freeze parsley. I grow about 3.5 feet of parsley because my mom always did.
Yeah.
My mom froze it, and it made a difference. And isn't it the basil that you do? Is it you that does the basil and does it in ice cube trays? Or
Yeah.
Yes.
That's awesome.
So I do pesto and then I just do plain basil
Yes.
as well. But
Yeah.
I do it in oil.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
In the
that
freezer.
makes it easy.
The easiest way to
What
grow
is
it.
your favorite basil though? Because there's so many varieties.
Well, there's lots of good ones,
There's
but the
lots of
easiest way to
goodies.
grow it is stick it with a tomato,
Yes.
because the tomato sucks up the extra moisture. Basil is a Mediterranean herb, but it doesn't like to be dry. It doesn't like to be wet. So the tomato balances it all out.
Yeah. It's about the only thing I like to put with tomatoes is basil.
Yeah. And the great thing about herbs is the more you harvest them, the more they grow. It's one of the few things that you can just whack back constantly and they just say thanks.
And it's one I personally believe that herb growing in general is one of the ways to sustain our food crops and to bring flavor into it. And we are not spending, reading a recipe book and you're going, oh, they want this and this and this. And you're going to the grocery store and buying this and this. And we complain that we're spending $5 or $6 on a pot of herbs. Well, it costs and the amount of production you get off of this is 100 times what you're spending to buy them.
Yeah.
And it's fresher.
And it's fresh.
Like
And the
thyme
package
this year.
price.
And the time.
Thyme was really hard to find. And when you found it, for a little glass bottle, it was $8. Well, if you buy a plant and then you harvest it, you can easily make it pay for itself in no time.
Right, because
So-
I just harvest it and dry my thyme.
Yeah.
And it works. And
it in a jar.
I have a jar. Well, actually, I consume, not I, but my niece and her family consume peanut butter. And these have turned into my favorite thing because I can store all sorts of things in it to dry them. And I will, for the first little while, I leave the lid off. and then I put the lid on it, and I get really good.
Something you can do right now, because the
Yes.
chives are blooming,
Yes.
is make chive vinegar. And it's a
So,
beautiful
chive
lavender color.
blossom vinegar.
So you throw them in vinegar.
Just plain old white vinegar.
A higher quality, so if you can do champagne vinegar or white wine vinegar.
Yes.
And then you let it
Yeah.
steep for a couple of weeks, and then you filter it out, and it's a beautiful pink color and has just a lovely little lavender color to it.
And it tastes
And
like
it has
onion, fresh
taste.
onion. It's
And then you can
tastes-
add other things
yeah.
to it, make your own salad dressing,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Make a great Christmas gift.
Wouldn't
Yeah.
it?
They're
Yes.
beautiful.
and you
Would
can
make-
also, you can dry the blossoms.
Yes.
You have to pull them off, but dry them, and they're, in the winter, you can sprinkle them over things, and they have that mild
We
onion
should all
scent.
go to Elaine's kitchen in August, September, because it's an amazing production number going on.
Yeah, well, we do a lot of harvesting and a lot of processing, but
Yeah. Well, she feeds boys. Come on.
but my boys don't really like any of it.
Big, tall kids.
If we grew, an acre of potatoes, they'd be happy. That's about it.
No, you go to Elaine's house to go have lunch or coffee or something. She's got 4 pots on the stove, and she's doing this, and she talks to you over top of the counter. I think there's nothing nicer than doing that. To me, that's what your garden is about, and bringing it to you. Okay, we have specimens. Oh, there they are.
Sat around for a week, and I can't see it down there.
You have thrips close in.
They're like tiny little cigar-shaped things,
See
and they
the-
suck the moisture out.
See the little critters and the silvery and then the black dots? Those are thrips.
You won't see them because they are so tiny.
See?
Yeah.
See? You're right. The mottling is caused by thrips.
Does thrips eat the
They
chlorophyll?
they
They
suck
chlorophyll
they
it.
suck the
The life out.
life out of it.
Yeah.
So what do you do for thrips?
Can you hold it up for the camera, please?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's an indication they're under stress.
Yes.
So if you can just keep them healthy, they'll
You see
outgrow
this
it.
one's doing the same
So it's
thing.
kind of like an aesthetic thing.
Yeah.
It's like aphids. Aphids move in, and then they kind of do their thing.
Yes.
What is predaceous for thrips?
It's hard
Wasps,
to...
any of the little insects.
I wonder if there's any nematodes that have any impact on thrips.
Yeah, they do, but they have to be in the
See?
soil.
There it is. There's some more of it.
Yeah.
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 So, the part of it too is your choice of fertilizer. You probably want to go to something in the way of fish fertilizer and make it organic. The root starter's all very well and good, but it's not dealing with the leaves.
You want
So-
something that's got a little more nitrogen in it.
Yeah, and that's why I say fish fertilizer or one of those, and that'll help it a great deal.
Greened up like it has
They
been
got
every
hit
year.
by the frost.
They
That's
got
what it is.
frosted.
Because a whole bunch of my
Because I
trees,
thought
same
it was
thing.
going
Yeah.
to
Because
die.
there was a frost in April, right?
Yeah,
We
there
were
was
really
just
warm,
yeah.
budding out, and then it got cold, and it hit everybody.
Because I thought these were little buds coming out, and
No, it's frost. It's frost damage.
like
Yeah.
before the frost kind of thing.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's
everything
frost.
warmed up too quickly this year.
And you can see where the sap was actively producing, and then all of a sudden the frost hit it,
Shocked.
and it shocked it.
So just leave it.
Just
Hopefully
prune
next
off the
year.
dead bits. And I think we are going to see. I mean, having this really wet spring is excellent,
It's
but I think
wonderful.
for the next few years, you're going to start to see damage that occurred last year. The last time we had that, 2013, we had that big flood.
Yes.
They said it would take 7 years for all the damage from that flood to manifest itself. So, these weird events, and plums aren't.
Well,
They're not
born-
particularly
yeah.
long-lived, anyways.
They pick and choose their battle. Am I going to grow leaves? Am I going to grow fruit? And plums are not. Longevity isn't in their gene pool, so you're fighting the battle of them
Yeah,
taking.
they like to make a thicket. That's why they sucker
Yeah.
so much.
Kind of like wrinkled fruit.
They want to grow in a. You're right, a thicket. They want to be. I often think that we waste some of our plant material using it to make big trees when we could be having great hedges.
Yeah, anything in the prunus genus, they
Yes.
really don't want to be a tree. They want to be a thicket. So there will be some tall ones, some short ones, but it's dense, and that's what provides them with lots of protection.
Yes.
The Evans cherry, you know, it'll be growing gangbusters, and then suddenly it dies.
Yes.
But it sends out lots of growth from the bottom, and now it becomes a thicket. So it's, we're just trying to make them do something they don't want to do.
I want to come to your garden. I want to see a thicket.
Oh, well, it's not all it's cracked up to be. We have cherry seedlings everywhere.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah. It's always interesting to me that the production that comes off of the secondary growth can produce all those babies. You know, and that's the part that
Trying to survive.
yeah, it's a survival mechanism, and the Evans cherry comes from the wild.
Yeah, it was north of Edmonton.
North of Edmonton is where it was originally found. And Ian, the guy Ian Evans, who brought it to
Cultivation.
Sale.
to cultivation and sale, he will quite freely admit that he's still working on better varietals. But he's turned his attention now to black knot and to getting that out of some of the choke cherries.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see which way he's going.
It's funny, I was part of a conference where Dr. Evans was there, and he said, "Oh, do you grow the Evans cherry?" And I went, "I hate that thing." Because I had just spent weeks digging out suckers, and it was like digging out, I felt like I'd been run over by a Mack truck afterwards, and I didn't realize till afterwards what I said. It's like, oops.
He's pretty thick-skinned.
Yeah, I think
he
so.
He truly is. He's been doing plant selection and plant breeding for years at the U of A, and he's very knowledgeable on the fruit tree part of things. So
That's cool.
he's very interesting. I think Bob Boers at U of S would be a little more sensitive, but
Possibly, yes.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, actually. Now we're talking about cherries.
Yes.
We have canker on one of our
Oh.
romance cherries.
Ooh.
My husband pruned the daylights out of it last year. It flushed this year, huge amount of bloom. It's still got canker. Do we have to take the whole thing out?
Yeah, because the canker will travel.
What does it look like, canker?
It oozes. So it's, when you look on the trunk, it's got kind of a blistery look, and it oozes a sap.
Oh.
But I mean, it's loaded with flowers and
it's probably
cherries.
going to produce massive amount of cherries, and that might be its last kick at the.
But I have a whole bunch of others in the same area, so is it going to infect
Yeah,
them?
it will, especially if
Can you bandage it to keep it from spreading for the season?
No.
Well, it
could,
depends on
but-
where it is. You can cut it out, but this is, a lot of it's low down.
I'm just wondering if
so-
you could just like cover it up to keep it from blowing or spreading,
Well,
so that you could at least get through the season with you could like harvest your cherries, then cull it in the fall.
Well, maybe we'll just let it flower and I'll kill it. It's easier to kill things after they've produced and flowered, and
Yes.
so
I mean, it's like when you look at the spruce trees, the big, huge spruce trees, and some of them are decidedly suffering, and it's because of the weather changes they've experienced over the last few years and the lack of moisture. And they get a canker, and it's called Leucostoma. And it literally, if you go look carefully at the spruces that are dying back and dying out, you look along the trunk and there's a white ooze coming down on them, and that is literally leuco, which is milk, and stoma, which is
Like a
scar.
cyst or scar, yeah.
So it is one of the things that we have to look at, and yet these spruces in this park, some of them are so healthy. There's one or two that aren't, and when I go and look closely, this one is on the corner near our building has Leucostoma canker. And I was taught that that is contagious, but as long as these trees don't get damage to them, we might be fine and it may not travel. But with the big wind we have, I don't know if you saw how many spruces just, and
tipped.
some of them tipped, some of them cracked in the middle and went down. So that is usually an opening for diseases. So that's kind of one of the things that I look at. Some people drive down the road and look at the trees and go, oh, they're so beautiful and they're so lovely, and I'm going, well, that'll survive and that one won't, and this.
Nature is red in tooth and claw.
Well,
She's
that's
out
right.
there like, you're dead. You're dead. You'll survive. You're dead.
Well-
You, once you're done flowering, dead.
Well, you learn to be a little tougher.
Well, you have to
Yeah.
be. Like, that's what I heard, is to be a master gardener, you have to kill more plants than you can raise. Because that's what it takes.
That's how you learn.
That's how you
That's
learn
how you
it.
learn.
And I mean, if any of you were to talk to any of the growers, the major plant growers in the country, and we in Canada have some of the finest plant breeders and growers, and they've done amazing work, and they will freely admit that they culled more than what they've kept going. But we have some amazing growers, and we have a huge history in the plant growing industry. And that's the part that, you know, I'm a big fan of the hardy shrub roses, and probably because most of them are Canadian.
Yep.
You know.
And the neat thing is that, you know, they produce 10,000 seedlings every year.
Yes.
One of those seedlings might survive and move on to the commercial. The rest of them get tossed. So
Yeah.
it's like, oh.
But it breaks your heart. I mean, and it's like if you ever get a chance to go to Guelph and go to the University of Guelph, they have the Garden of the Lilacs, and they have every selected variety of lilacs that's ever grown.
Wow.
And the cool thing is, not most of them, but a good percentage are selected from Canadian research.
Yeah.
Cool.
So it's one of those things we look at. And if we were to look at the common everyday vegetable garden, we are looking at Canadian selections for hardiness. So it makes a big question mark in my mind how big our industry really is.
We just don't know much about it. You
Yes.
know, a lot of it, you hear a lot about the American side of it, but really not so much about the Canadian side. You know, we tend to be quieter, I guess.
We're quiet and we don't toot our own horn. I mean,
Yeah.
we have a wonderful berry that's out on the market now, the Haskap.
Right here.
There we go.
And behind us here. And it came out of the University of Saskatoon.
Sure did.
Yeah.
And it is really well respected now. When they first put it on the market, it was...
Yeah. Same with the romance cherries.
Yes.
I mean, they're revolutionizing the cherry pie industry
Yes,
because you don't need to use a red dye to make it look red.
they're beautiful.
They're super, super hardy and tough. They produce
very
prolifically. They're delicious.
Oh, they're really
So, yeah.
tasty. They're not huge like the Bings and all those, but they're a nice shape and a size, and they give such wonderful flavor.
Good acid.
If you let them get really, really, really ripe, they are like eating the original Bing.
I just bought from Golden Acre a cherry tree, and I put it in. It's the first tree put in our new house. And instead of it being grafted on the root bulb, there's actually 3 different species of romance. And they all
very
kind of
cool.
fruit at different times. So there's actually 3 tree trunks coming up. So I'm excited to see that, because for a small space to be able to get more than one variety. And you can get them for the Haskaps too, so that they will cross-pollinate within the same planting site. So I'm excited to see how that works out, because the more we have, more diversity you can have in a single space, the better the harvest, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, one year we harvested 55 kilos. And of course you have to hand pick them, which was a lot of work.
Yeah.
But we dry them, we make pie filling, we use them in desserts, you can make sauces. They really are fabulous. And like Kath was saying, the cost of fruit and where it's coming from, I think, you know.
And the chemicals used in its production.
Yeah, we can
And
grow a lot of this
preserving.
stuff here, and we can be eating seasonally with things that we preserve that we've grown. I'm wondering this year about, you know, the sweet cherries, because of the fires that ravaged the Okanagan last year. How many
yeah.
of those orchards are left? And
That's
if they're
right.
gone, no one's going to replant them because the land value is too high. So where do they come from? Washington. They don't
Yeah.
taste as good.
They're not as good as BC cherries.
No.
There's nothing nicer.
They're not dry.
We're
It's not dry enough.
biased at all.
No.
Well, it's true. They're
Well,
not. They don't
yes,
have the
I
right
know.
climate.
I know, I'm just teasing.
But
it's
we
like
have to-
Canadian. Always better. It
We-
is always
we're always
better.
better.
Always better.
I mean, this country was built on farmers and
Yeah.
100%.
agriculture and
All sorts of apples we can grow here. We can grow our
Oh.
own pears,
Apricots?
all bush. Apricots a little
and
tougher.
most of
I
these
have one.
crops were
But do you get apricots?
worked
Yeah,
on
I
in
did.
Brooks,
Cool.
Alberta,
They were really mealy.
and
That doesn't
Indian
happen very
Head,
often.
They were
Saskatchewan,
really mealy.
and
Yeah.
Morden, Manitoba.
We cooked them
The
down. They
3
tasted
prairie
good. They were not good
provinces
fresh.
holding their own with food production and fruit production. So when I look at that and everybody says, oh, I just don't want put just one apple tree in your yard and just think of the food that you can make from that.
And once it gets going, there's a lot of apples off that tree.
And I grew up with a grandma and a mother who made more apple crisp than you could shake a stick at, and we had apples in the root cellar forever. Yeah. But now I appreciate that because I love a homegrown apple.
Yep.
So it's something that, and I mean, you must know it from the bee part of things because they really enjoy an apple.
Oh, they sure do.
I grew up on the West Coast, and the only thing my dad liked to grow was fruit. And you could go out and you just walk around and snack.
Yes.
And you moved out here and it was like raspberries, period.
Or ornamental apples.
Yeah,
or
lots
the
of rosy
crab
blooms.
Apples, and you're just like, well, they can be tasty, kind of, depending.
They make a great pie, believe it or not.
No, I'm talking about like walking around and eating. They can
Not
be a little.
trees. I mean, I grew up with my grandfather who grew peas, and he grew 15 feet of peas, and we would be sent out to pick peas for supper. And by the time we'd picked enough for Grandma and Grandpa, we weren't hungry because we'd eaten them all, because there's nothing nicer than a fresh pea. There's just nothing nicer.
Yeah.
And Grandpa also grew his own carrots and his own beets, and my grandma made Harvard beets, pickled beets.
Yeah, so good.
Just amazing stuff in our cupboards, and it just used to go, oh, this is so good.
Well, it's nice through the winter months is I've got a freezer full of vegetables, or there's a cold room or a garage full of your things, and right now it's struggling because we're out of everything. And I have some lettuce. It's like you can only do lettuce so many times, and it's like I need some other things here.
Her boys won't eat any carrots off any shelf because she grows fussy. The best carrots.
Yeah.
So it's all in how we taste it, I think.
Yeah, and you can taste the difference. Yeah. So it's a big difference. Yes. Yeah. Did you know that
hungry.
Did you know potatoes are the most sprayed crop in the world? Not in your backyard, but if you buy potatoes, especially from the States, they actually spray with some kind of pesticide, and they have to stay off the field for 24 hours. Doesn't matter if something goes wrong, you have to stay away. I'm thinking, and potatoes collect things.
Yes.
So, yeah. So, I mean, do you really want to be eating that?
That's why I buy Canadian potatoes, but even there I'm a little nervous of it.
Yeah, you just, it's, if you can grow your own, then you eat seasonally, and it's just more healthy because it doesn't have to travel or ship so it's something we are going to be doing more of, just because the cost of food is going up like mad.
Well, we're running out of time. I've thoroughly enjoyed my visit with my friends. Thank you for letting me do this.
Thanks, guys.
I think this is so fun.
Thank you, Kath, for hosting us.
You're welcome.